Hi. So, after reviewing this week about UDL, assistive technology, and other resources that I found online, I'll share what I learned. Well, first I started by reviewing assistive technology because I'm doing my thesis on it, so I feel like I have a pretty good grasp on what assistive technology is and how it's used in schools and in clinics. But one of the resources that was posted was about consumers who use assistive technology, and my thesis is related to consumer preferences. So I looked into that article a little bit more, and I was reading some of the things that consumers suggested about assistive technology, and it was interesting because it was related to children, and there's limited research on consumer preferences and consumer input on assistive technology. My thesis is currently about adults who use assistive technology and their preferences and involvement in the overall assessment process. And I was looking into a few things that consumers say for evaluating assistive technology procedures. And since it was about children, it was speaking to the parents, and they were discussing how it's important to look at the children's individual needs, the quality, the reliability of the device. Make sure to use it in different settings because the child will not just be at home or in school. They will have to take the device with them from setting to setting and be able to use it with unfamiliar listeners, familiar listeners, and in familiar settings and unfamiliar settings. The product usability and reliability. How is it to learn and operate? Since the child will have to learn it, the parents will have to learn it, the teachers will have to learn it. How reliable is it? Especially with technology, the device may die. Is the software good? Does it stay charged? And what technical support is available if there is a problem? And make sure to have the child try it before you buy it because who knows, you may like it on paper, and then when the child tries it, it may not sound or work very good. So I thought that was interesting as well. And what I thought was also interesting was that it didn't really say much about asking the child about how they feel about using the device, and that's one of the main reasons I am conducting the thesis that I am, is because I want consumers to be able to voice their opinion and say what their experience is like with their device and how often they were asked about what device they want. Do they prefer to use a device? Do they want to use any kind of assistive technology? And my thesis is related to adults because they will be able to answer the questions and be more familiar with their overall involvement. But a point that I found through my thesis research is that what's written in textbooks about AAC assessment is that consumers are supposed to be the main point, and they're supposed to be involved, and you're supposed to ask them how they feel, what devices they want, and give them plenty of options. However, in research, the consumers' answers to qualitative and interview questions are very much different than what's reported. Consumers usually say, I was given one option, I wasn't given any options, I was assessed by a professional and told this device is best for you, and it was left at that. They weren't given time to give their input, their options were not discussed very much, and most of them feel lost and abandon the assistive technology device because of lack of support. They weren't sure how to use it. They didn't know what to do when it broke down. The device wouldn't stay charged. They didn't like the interface. It wasn't user-friendly. They couldn't open their email. They couldn't do day-to-day things on their device. So they stopped using it, which makes complete sense. And part of my thesis is looking at the overall involvement and preference related to the device and the assessment and their outcome and where they are now. If they were very involved, are they more likely to use it? Do they have more success? And is their outcome better? Or if they weren't likely to use the device, did they abandon it and they're struggling now or still looking for other options? And on that note, I looked at the ASHA website for their definition of AAC, and I'll share that with all of you, which is AAC includes all forms of communication that are used to express thoughts, needs, wants, and ideas. And people with severe speech and language disorders rely on AAC to supplement or replace speech that is not functional. And Types of AAC can be unaided, which includes the use of body and gestures, or aided, which includes technology or assistance other than the person's body. And there's also low tech and high tech. There's many different AAC or assistive technology devices that can be used. And I also read an article about supporting families of children who use AAC. And I thought this article was interesting because it really explains how much support a family needs to use a device. And it also led me to the point that in order for a child to be successful using a device, they need to see others communicating in a way that they do, which would be with the device. It's kind of odd to think that I want my child to communicate with this device, but I'm going to verbally speak to them. That doesn't really make sense to the child. And the child may not want to use the device because they seem different, or they know that it's may not seem expected of them to use a device. So it's important for parents to communicate on the type of device, or communicate the same way that the child or whoever they're speaking to communicates. So the parent should point to pictures on an icon and use the voice output to communicate with the child, and the child will communicate that way with the parents. So I thought that was interesting, and some families may have a hard time allowing their child to use a device because their child will be different. They'll have something to carry around with them. I recently had a conversation with a client's family in the clinic about a mom not wanting her child to use an AAC device because he will stop speaking, which is not true. Speech pathologists still work on speech because speech is important, and we're not supposed to just abandon skills that people struggle with, which is also what I read about in the UDL book for this week, and I will discuss that in a little bit. But and we also have to tell parents that the use of AAC does not hinder speech. Like I said, we will still continue to work on speech. Let's see. And in-home training is also important because the child will be in their home. They need to feel comfortable and use it in a familiar environment. And then it can be generalized to other environments. So I thought that was interesting. I read an article, Assistive Technology 101. I was mostly familiar with all of those things. It was just about choosing the right device for the child. High-tech, low-tech devices come in different sizes. There should be an assessment. Parents should be involved. The assessment will include assessing a child's strengths and weaknesses, and their overall vocabulary, as well as what words would like to be programmed on the device. And I would like to share with you all a device from Saltillo, and they offer a free low-tech visual, almost like a PEX communication board. It can be printed, laminated, and you put it in a 3-ring binder, and it can be used for anyone. It's on the website, and that website is Saltillo, and I posted that in my link of resources for the week. I then began reading about UDL, which I'm not as familiar with, but I was reading about top 10 UDL tips for designing and engaging learning environments because I think it's hard to engage people who may not necessarily be motivated or interested, which I have experience with in the clinic, because sometimes children they don't understand why they're going to speech. They don't want to be at speech. But the 10 things that were discussed are making options flexible, providing a lot of options, active reflection, sharing examples and non-examples of things. So this is an example of what I'm looking for. This is an example of what I'm not looking for. Increase opportunities for collaboration. People like to collaborate with each other. I do. It makes me feel assured that my answer is correct or I'm on the right path. Make sure there's adequate resources for the demands of the project. If the student is not able to access what they need to complete the project, it will create more struggles. Frequent feedback, flexible assessment options rather than just a written test or a presentation. Give students other options to show that they've learned and understood the material. Minimize distractions and make sure the goals are clear and specific so students know exactly what is asked of them. And then I went on to read Chapter 9, about UDL and Learning Unplugged. I thought this chapter was really interesting because it makes us think of UDL in a way other than with technology. Technology is not the basis of UDL, it's the means of UDL. So, yeah, we should provide multiple means, provide of representation, multiple means of expression, and multiple means of engagement. And that was expressed throughout Chapter 9 through a seed experiment related to a science class. It started that the students were able to try a juice that came from a seed, look at the seed, use a magnifying glass. They were provided a checklist to look at seeds and certain characteristics, and then they were given the opportunity to group the seeds by a characteristic of their choice. And then they got to bring in seeds from their outside home environment. And I thought this was all really interesting because the reading explained how UDL can be used without technology. And when I was reading it, I thought about experiences that I've had. We are usually provided with a checklist. We're usually given a hands-on experience. And then we are usually asked to go out and try it for ourselves. And I thought an interesting part of the chapter was when they were talking about students who have motor disabilities or are unable to move around and engage in like walking from station to station, or who are in a wheelchair, that we aren't just supposed to remove the motor component from their activity, because in life they're going to come across things that are difficult and challenging, and we are supposed to give students the tools to overcome challenges and work around barriers and strategies, which I thought was so important because even when we struggle with things, we can't just take it away and remove it from all activities. We use strategies, or we do extra research, or look up definitions, or ask a friend or a colleague, and we use our own strategies to help ourselves work around these challenging times. So I thought that was really interesting. And there was also a point made about if students are given too many options for working around something that they struggle with, will they ever develop the skills that they are struggling with, such as removing the writing component for children who struggle with writing? No, that doesn't really make sense, because writing is a good skill to have, but there are other ways of assessing someone's writing skills. It may not be with a pen and paper, it could be typed, it could be text-to-speech, but teachers can provide sentence starter strips or carrier phrases or a word wall or a word bank, which help students get started, and they can still work on writing. And then I thought another important point was executive functions. We as speech pathologists learn about executive functions and metacognition and metalinguistic skills and all the things that are important for thinking about your own thinking. And I think that's important because that's how you keep yourself on track. That's how you regulate and organize your ideas and plan homework and keep a planner. And young children haven't developed those executive function skills yet, so they're provided with a lot of support in the classroom. But as students get older, even in high school, and then they get to the graduate level, they will be held responsible for taking notes, keeping a planner, deadlines, due dates, all things like that. And we should also provide them with strategies to be successful in the real world. And an ending point of the chapter was that we're preparing students for a real life situation. When we think about the seed lesson, it takes a lot of components from everyday real life, which we need to prepare students to be successful in, and we can't just remove all the barriers that they may face. We need to provide strategies which will be generalized into everyday life and will ultimately result in a successful member of society. And my overall thoughts on this video blog are, I don't mind it. It's interesting. It's not my favorite, but it's very UDL and provides us a different way of expressing our understanding and our own learning rather than typing in a blog. So those are all the things I've learned today, and, well, not today, but throughout this week. And I provided a link of resources, and don't forget to check out the Saltillo Low Tech Communication Board if anyone would like to print it and use it for students.